too often I'll tell my players, hey, if you want to play at the next level, and I'll talk about the next level. I'll talk about what they need to do academically and character-wise and athletically. And I've really tried to just stop. I mean, certain kids you have to share that with. We talk to our players about what they need to do. We talk about that stuff. But I think there's a lot more power in being where their feet are and not always trying to find joy in that next level. Because you see so many people at the professional level, people who end up making millions of dollars who commit suicide, or millions of dollars who have failed marriages and go bankrupt or whatever. And I think too often it's a trap to always look ahead to the next greatest thing or next greatest level, as opposed to say, hey, let's be where our feet are and just enjoy this moment.
Welcome to the Coaches Club podcast, powered by Transform Sport, where we believe great coaches transform lives, athletes deserve great coaches, and coaches deserve great training. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches and leaders in sport that will help you grow as an effective teacher and transformational leader so that you and your team can reach your potential. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Coach Kurt Hines to the podcast. Coach Hines is a high school football coach in California, a keynote speaker, and a podcast host. Before we hop into the conversation, let me tell you a little bit about some of the upcoming bonus episodes I'm going to be releasing. This conversation was originally an interview I recorded in preparation for a TEDx talk that has never happened. If you want to learn more about that experience, go listen to the trailer of the podcast. I didn't know that I would be turning these interviews into a podcast, so that means a couple things. First, I didn't have the right equipment, and the quality isn't as high as my weekly podcast episodes have been. I've done my best to edit them, but just know that as you listen. Second, I had a general template of questions I was asking all of the initial coaches I interviewed, so it may have a different feel than some of the episodes you've listened to thus far. But regardless, I think you'll still find the conversation valuable to your coaching, as Coach Hines shares a lot of great thoughts and perspectives around coaching and the culture of sports. And I'll have coaching notes for the bonus episodes as well. So if you enjoyed this episode and want to get the free podcast notes, go to coachesclubpod.com or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode. Now to my conversation with Coach Kurt Hines. Enjoy the episode.
Can you just give me like a brief, like what levels, what sports have you coached, how long?
Yes, so I am going into my 23rd year of coaching high school football. I was started years ago in New Hampshire, where my wife and I raised our 4 kids, and became a head coach out there. And it was a brand new high school. We went through the growing pains. My first year, we had no seniors, and we got our teeth kicked in every week. Like we lost bad. But I joke about it, but at the end of every game, I don't care if it's basketball, football, tennis, you walk through and you shake hands with the other team and you say good game, and no one even lied to us. They were like, beautiful field, great stadium. We were just horrible. But and a lot of that truthfully was just I was doing way too much too soon and doing a lot wrong. So a lot of it was just growing pains and of the program, a lot of growing pains as a new head coach, but ended up staying there as a head coach for 7 years, and but we ended up building a powerhouse where we ended up having 144 players in our program in my last 4 years, and went to the state championship 3 out of those 4 years, each time in a higher division. So I thought, man, this is it. Like this is where I'm going to retire and all that stuff. Not that I'm close to retirement yet, but and then our oldest daughter of 4 kids came out to school at San Diego State, and we visited, and I thought, man, that's gorgeous, but never even gave it a second thought about, moving and uprooting our family and all that. And then she got married, and we had our first grandson. So 5 years ago, we moved out here, and haven't looked back. I was an assistant coach out here for 2 years at a private Christian school, and just felt the calling, the desire to be a head coach again. And I don't care what level, in my opinion, I don't care what level it is. I think if you love if you love those you coach and you pour into it, it's a full-time job anyways, and we all have other jobs, we're all teachers or something. But being a head coach is just so much more demanding when you're dealing with parents and boosters and administration and all that stuff. But I just felt the calling to be a head coach again. So after 2 years out here at a private Christian school as an assistant, I applied for the head coaching job at Coronado and got that, and just finished my third season here. So we are, like all of us with the craziness with COVID, we're getting ready for the season in a very different way than ever before. So that's my brief coaching history.
No, that's awesome. I love it. And kind of similar to that, just tell me, like, brief athletic playing history. Growing up, what sports did you play? How long?
Yeah, so I grew up in Rhode Island. So I grew up playing hockey for 9 years. Loved it. But when I started playing football in second grade, tried baseball for 1 year, and that clearly was not my sport. So did hockey and football, and as soon as I entered high school, our coaches, who I loved and still respect and have a relationship to this day, but they were the old school, mindset of, if you're not in the weight room, then you're not really committed to football type thing. So I stopped playing hockey. And I don't hate them for it, but I hate that mentality, because I'm a firm believer kids should be multi-sport athletes. I think there's so many physical and mental and growth things that can occur from that. So yeah, growing up, I played football, played hockey for 9 years, football for, from second grade through college. Played at a small Division III school up in New Hampshire. And loved it, and talk about that often with my players, because I think too often kids at the high school level want to play collegiate sports and think D1 is the only route to go. And unfortunately, I've had players that go that route and have great success. I've had kids that go on to Boston College and have full ride scholarships and start 3 or 4 years. But I've also had kids that have gone Division I that sit the bench for 4 years, or don't finish. And I talk to the players now. I'm like, listen, do you want to go to whatever school we're talking about because you can see yourself playing there realistically, or because you want mom and dad to wear the sweatshirt? And I always tell them, if you're passionate about basketball or football or whatever, the school doesn't matter. If you have an opportunity to continue playing 3-4 more years, that's what I really try to get them to look into.
No, that's powerful. I love that. That's really good. All right, a few questions just kind of focused on when you played as an athlete, and these can be just brief. First thing that comes to your mind. When you were an athlete, why did you play sports?
It's funny because I was just interviewed on this about 2 years ago, and the video came back up, so I had to laugh at myself. As a player, I played football to hurt people. I was blessed. I did not come from a violent home. My parents were always involved. I was raised blue collar, middle class America, if you will. But I loved the violence of the game. It's a completely different answer. And I'm not sure you'll get this as to why I coach. But as a player, I loved being able to hurt someone, not dirty or cheap, definitely within the confines of the game. But I loved the physical chess match on steroids, so to speak. It was just a crazy. I loved the violence of the game as a player.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's great. Love it. To the next question, what was, and maybe it's partly what you just said, but as an athlete, what was the most fun thing about playing sports for you?
Yeah, it's along the same lines. Playing with your friends, playing with your teammates, playing with your buddies, and going out there for us in football on a Friday night and being able to, play a crosstown rival or whatever it was, and just compete with your friends and to be able to, like I said, to inflict some sort of pain. Even now, as a grown man, I feel embarrassed saying that, but as a player, that's what it was.
Yeah, no, that's real. You're not the only one for sure, especially in
right.
That's great. I love it. The next one, what was the most frustrating thing about playing as an athlete? So what comes to mind first? Like, man, frustrating.
You know, for me, the most frustrating part playing was, and it was a life lesson for me, but realizing that I had to be a student athlete. You know, and my parents kept me out of football my 8th grade season because I failed a class in 7th grade. And it was one of the best things they could have done for me because it really taught me a very valuable lesson of balance and being a student athlete. But I think now more than ever with how challenging and demanding academics are, and I think should be. But, you know, as a player, just balancing that work, study, play, you know, just having that balance.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Love it. Well, now we'll kind of shift into the coaching side of things. You know, first question in that section is just, why do you coach sports? Why do you coach football?
Yes.
What's the why?
It has zero to do with hurting people. Just to empower people. I had a 7th grade math teacher who math was growing up was my worst subject. It was the most challenging. And I had a 7th grade math teacher who I remember would sit on the corner of his desk and just talk to us for 5 or 10 minutes every class about life, about football, about cheerleading, or whatever it was that he knew we did outside of school. And I remember sitting there and I was like, man, this guy cares. Like he really, really cares about us as people. So, when I thought about the doing two things I love, I knew I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, but to realize I could marry the two, you know, empower people while at the same time coaching a sport I loved. That's it. So just to be able to impact and to empower as many people as I can.
That's good. So kind of along those same lines, what is it about coaching that you enjoy the most? I'm sorry. What's the part of coaching that I do? What do you enjoy the most about it?
Oh, enjoy.
What's the part?
The relationships. You know, having everything from having the stud players that may be arrogant or cocky and getting them to find some humility and getting them to realize the platform they have as a stud athlete in high school to empower other teammates, to the kid that you know will probably always be 3rd or 4th string at best, but to get them to continue playing for 4 years, not because it helps the team at all, but because you know it's something they need. For me, it's my favorite thing is just the relationships you build and the lives you can touch.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. So on the other side of that, what's the most frustrating thing about coaching sports?
You know, for me, I think the most frustrating thing about coaching sports, it's changed over the years. Here in Southern California, there's a huge culture, if you will, of kids transferring from one school to the next for greater opportunities or whatever. And I struggle with that only because, and we don't have a lot of kids that leave Coronado yet. We may or may not. We've had a few over the years, but I think there's something magical or really special about playing for your hometown, playing for your friends that you grew up playing with on the streets or on the beach or whatever the case may be. I think there's a lot to be learned about playing for your town where maybe you're not the stud or maybe it's not a Division I program, so to speak, but you can gain a lot more life skills and values as opposed to just jumping around from school to school to school. I think that's one of my biggest, if I can cheat and give two, unless you choose whichever one you want, is and I want to preface it by saying I realize there are a lot of good personal trainers out there, but I also feel, regardless of the sport, I think there's a lot of the street sharks, if you will, that train young men and young women, and they're saying all the right things to the parents about, little Timmy should be a starting quarterback or point guard or whatever, and saying all the great things that parents want to hear because they're getting paid, and they don't see how that particular individual is day in and day out for their program, whether it's a character issue or coachable or whatever it is. I think sometimes, not all, but some trainers lose sight of training the individual for the sport and for life, and get too much into the politics of, why they think, they should be starting or whatever, without knowing the program at all.
No, that's good. That's really good. So, and this kind of ties right into what you were just talking about, and those things you just mentioned, I think, can really answer a lot of it. But the next question is just, how would you describe the current culture of youth sports in our country? And when I say youth sports, let's talk high school and below. So, interscholastic, high school, all the way through your grassroots programs. How would you describe the culture of sports?
Yeah, I think, and I love it. I like I said, I've been doing it for 23 years. It's a passion of mine. But I think there is a culture, and I try really hard not to, I don't want to say not to allow my coaches, but to really call my coaches out, my assistants, when I hear them say, oh, today's kids, or these kids today, because we're the ones raising these kids today. So if we don't like what we see, that's something that, we got to change at home or with our coaching. I think there's a big culture of, everyone gets a trophy, and just get a trophy for showing up, and that's not life. I put out a video a while ago. I don't know. I think it's one of my pinned videos on Twitter or whatever, talking about playing favorites. And I was like, every coach plays favorites, and our favorites are usually the ones that show up, work hard, are selfless, and all that stuff. One of the reasons I love coaching high school football or high school sports is because I believe that even though they're young men and young women, they're still so impressionable. And I think that if we think there's a society or a culture of everyone gets a trophy, I think we can greatly change that culture one relationship at a time by mentoring and modeling, the fact, one of the things we say in my program a lot is, competition breeds success. And I know I didn't invent or come up with that phrase or saying, but I'm a firm believer that, if I'm not starting for your basketball program, I can quit and for years talk about how you didn't like me, or I can transfer to a different school where they don't have that position filled yet, or I can stay and work harder than anyone else and just pour my heart and soul into it and end up being a starter, or not, in the process make everyone else around me better by competing. So I think the culture throughout the nation, from what I hear in coaching on the East and West Coast, is everyone gets a trophy. We all deserve to start or win. But I'm also a firm believer that as coaches, we can change that culture tremendously within the confines of our own programs by being that example that, none of us, coaches or not, are entitled to anything. We all have to work for it and really get them to enjoy the process of not just game day, but of showing up every day and competing, and showing up every day and working hard for something we believe in. Yeah.
That's really good. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep up and type some of these things down.
Absolutely.
This kind of ties into what you were just talking about, kind of thinking more about youth sports culture and what you've said so far, this participation trophy culture. And then also earlier you mentioned just kind of the transfer culture. Now that's really become a thing of kids just always thinking the grass is greener and they're just ready to leave. But is there anything else that you would say are big or a bigger problem facing youth sports than those things?
I think one of the things that, and I think you probably see this, Coach, more than I do in football yet, is the travel ball stuff, where the pay to play. Some kids you find out whether it's baseball or basketball or 7-on-7 football, where they sometimes stop playing for their high school teams and start doing these elite clubs that, by these self-proclaimed gurus in different sports that promise them the world. I've been guilty of this as a coach also, and I really try to catch myself, but too often I'll tell my players, hey, you want to play at the next level, and I'll talk about the next level. I'll talk about what they need to do academically and character-wise and athletically, and I've really tried to just stop. I mean, certain kids you have to share that with. We talk to our players about what they need to do. We talk about that stuff. But I think there's a lot more power in being where their feet are and not always trying to find joy in that next level. Because you see so many people at the professional level, people who end up making millions of dollars who commit suicide, or millions of dollars who have failed marriages and go bankrupt or whatever. And I think too often it's a trap to always look ahead to the next greatest thing or next greatest level, as opposed to say, hey, let's be where our feet are and just enjoy this moment. Enjoy where we are, still working, still having goals, and still striving for things, but not always looking to the next level. You think about what we're dealing now with the whole COVID thing. Last year's spring athletes, that they were just focusing on the next season, and then, gosh, several weeks into that season, they find out they're done. Yeah. I think that we, and I think this applies. I don't want to get preachy with you, but I think this applies for all of us in all walks of life, whether it's with our relationships, our employment, whether it's athletics, just be where our feet are and to not miss the joy of the moment by looking ahead too often.
Absolutely. No, that's good. That's really powerful. I appreciate that. Good. Well, so I think you just kind of even led into the next question a little bit. So thinking about those problems that you mentioned, participation trophy, transfer culture, the pay-to-play travel ball, just in your opinion, how can we as a culture, as coaches, how can we best address these problems?
Yeah, I'm going to go back. You're going to get off the phone call with me that guy's kind of an idiot, or you're going to say he's smarter than I realized. I'm not sure which one is true. But for me, personally, it goes back to relationships. When I first got my first head coaching job, the administration in New Hampshire was a very affluent community. They said, Coach, if we hire you, how long before you're in the playoffs? And without hesitation, without batting an eye, I'm like 3 to 5 years. Now we made that happen. Our third year, we went to the playoffs. That was after getting our teeth kicked in for the first 2 years. But now when people ask me that, it's not some calendar, how many months or seasons to achieve something. It's relationships. I think people talk about helicopter parents and stuff. I think if you build a relationship where your players know that you love them, not because they're great, not because they can help you achieve something on your agenda, but you just passionately love them as people, I think that's how you build relationships. That's how you change cultures. That's how you break down barriers of things that have been going on for years. Just by my first year here at Coronado, I came out to practice. This was like week 2 in the season, week 2 or 3. And there were 15 kids, and we only had 47 young men in the program that year. We had 15 of them as I'm walking from my truck to the field with Band-Aids on their elbows, or the inside part where you give blood. And they're like, Coach, we can't practice today. I'm like, what? They're like, well, we gave blood. And one of my assistants who had been here for 18 years, and he was like, Coach, sorry, they do that every year. And he's like, every year the head coach before you would yell at them and would, make them feel horrible, and they keep doing it. The culture was, hey, give blood, you get a day out of practice. So I ended up pulling up the team together, and I said, "Don't you ever miss practice again, because you're giving blood." I said, "Listen, I promise you." I said, "Give you my word. If you ever want to give blood, call me. I'll go with you. Any Saturday, any Sunday, any time of the year. But let's not do it here." So point of the story was the following year, and since then I haven't had a single player not practice because they were giving blood. And yes, it's important to donate blood, but they were using that as a crutch or as a way out. And I think the reason was I didn't yell at them, I didn't scream at them or threaten them or make them run at practice or anything, in my opinion, stupid like that. Just build relationships, and they'll know that, hey, listen. It goes back to for my 7th grade year in that math class. I never became a great math student, but I passed the class and I did well, and it was really because that teacher cared about me, and I didn't want to disappoint him. So I think that's how you change the culture, is by building one relationship where people know you have a vested interest in them.
That's good. It's really good. So next question, and again, you're kind of hitting on all these things as we're going, but just in your opinion, what are the qualities that come to your mind when you think about the qualities of a great coach?
Yeah, great question. For me, it's loving, caring. I gave a talk a while ago on a podcast, and it was kind of one of those interactive things, and I asked the audience to list qualities that they thought of a great parent. And I just had them throw out words, and they were throwing out loving, caring, attentive, present, all the different stuff. And I said, let's throw out qualities of a great coach. And they were completely different. They were like, knowledgeable and hard and this and that. And I said, shouldn't they be the same? If you talk about, I think every coach in the nation, from youth sports through the NFL or NBA, talk about, hey, it's about fundamentals, doing the simple things right, and accountability and character. I think great coaches, far more than the X's and O's and diagrams and drills, love people. Love their players, are selfless leaders first, selfless, humble servants of others. And I've been blessed over the years to have been coached by and to coach with some great human beings. And I've also coached and been coached by some jackwagons that knew the sport really well, but just you just knew that they loved the 1, 2, or 3 players that were studs. And they didn't love them as people. They just loved the players that were studs because they could help them win some games. I think it's powerful when I know that my stud athletes see me in practice or in the weight room pouring into a freshman or someone new to football that can't put their helmet on straight, or tie their cleats, it seems, but they see me giving the same attention to them. I think that builds a trust and respect where they know that when I'm getting on them or coaching them or however it is, it's not just because they're good, because they see me pouring into the players the same way that maybe never will see the field.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. And that's hard to coach your best and your worst well at the same time. That can be really hard, especially if you don't have a relationship like that. That's really good.
Well, it is, and I asked our guys to be on the practice this morning, just about an hour or two ago. I said, I started out with a joke. I said, "What's a rhetorical question?" And some of them many didn't know. And I said, "Listen, it's a question that does not need an answer." I said, "If you guys sneak out of your house and when you're sneaking back in, mom and dad are standing there saying, 'Do you think we're idiots?' I'm like, do not answer that question. That's a rhetorical question." But I said, I have a rhetorical question for you guys. I said, so don't answer this now, but I want you to think about it. Who did you make better today other than yourself? And you could kind of, see the wheels turning. I said, listen, I said, if we only show up to make ourselves better, we're going to fail miserably. I said, but if you show up to practice saying, hey, listen, in addition to myself, I'm going to look for a teammate that seems like they're struggling or down or dogging it or whatever it is. And that's one of my favorite things as a coach also, is getting others to find the joy in building up their teammates.
I
think the world needs a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. So on the other side, the opposite of that question, and you mentioned one thing already, but what comes to mind when you think about the qualities of a bad coach?
Yeah, title oriented. You know, they're focused too much on their position or their rank as a coach. Someone that prides themselves, and I've been around several coaches that pride themselves on being football widows, saying, "Hey, my family knows that it's football season, so they won't see me much." And you hear about so many divorces and horrible things. And you know, I've been blessed in the years I've been a head coach. I've always said that we don't have meetings on Sundays. I refuse to, because we've got to have balance. Our families have got to know that they're not being put on some back burner. For me, I think the coaches that are demeaning or demoralizing bully coaches are the worst, because, you know, as coaches, I think when you think about your freshman basketball team, we have a captive audience. Most of them, I'm guessing, unlike the students in your class that have to be there by law. You know, your kids have to go to school. Yeah. Your basketball players want to be there. So we have a captive audience where some of the things we say, mom and dad or their pastor or preacher or whatever could be saying the same things for years, but they hear it from coach, and it just hits on a different level. I think when you have coaches that use their platform or their power to bully or to manipulate people, are the worst kind. You know, that's just there's no place for it, in my opinion.
No, that's really good. And like you were just saying about the captive audience, that's one of the things the head coach that I work with, one of the most powerful things I've learned from him was he said something along the same lines. He's like, look, the difference between us down here on the court and when we're up in the classroom is, for the most part, all the kids want to be here. And like this is a place that they love. And absolutely, it is such a captive audience. That's such a good way to think about it and talk about it. So kind of staying on this topic of coaches and coaching, what's the first thing that comes to your mind that you wish you would have known about coaching when you started?
Not to try to be people's best friends. I think we all like to be liked. But I know my first few years as an assistant, there would be situations where a player might come up to me in a game and be like, "Hey, why'd coach call that?" And not really looking for a learning opportunity, but they were looking to complain. And I'd be like, "Yeah, I don't know," or something foolish like that. And I wish I knew then what I know now, as far as, you know, what players need most are not best friends, that they need coaches that love them enough to be honest with them in all things. And I'm not saying tough love to, you know, in my program personally, we have a no swearing policy. You know, if the coach swears or a player swears, they do 25 push-ups. If it becomes an issue, the coach or player will be gone. I think, you know, coaches need to love their players enough so they can be honest in all things, whether it's their ability or if someone comes up and does question you, like, "Hey, why is Coach so-and-so having him start over me," or whatever, and not being a chump, for lack of better words, and feeding into that negativity, but really just having honest conversations with them.
Yeah, that's really good. Good. A couple more. So tell me about your coaching education. What was that like? Did you have any formal education and training before you became a coach? Since you've been a coach, what's your coaching education and learning look like?
Yeah, nothing formal before becoming a coach, just playing experience. The on-the-job training, and I was blessed because I was blessed to coach under a head coach who knew the game of football and loved people. So in my opinion, I coached with a really good coach. I've also over the years coached with some, you know, we use the word jackwagons a lot, but some jackwagons who know the game really well, but mistreat and abuse and use people in a horrible way. But I think you learn a lot from that, because sometimes you learn, you know, things you'd never do, and it strengthens your passion in other areas. Since being a coach, my formal training has been, going to workshops and clinics and seminars. Of course, we all have to do the CPR and first aid courses, and there's one course, I don't remember the exact name of it, in high school football, and I'm not sure if it's the same for all high school sports, but there's you take it one time and you're good for the rest of your career, but it's like character and coaching or something foolish. And the reason I say foolish is because I can't remember anyone taking the class and not passing it. And I think there are people that could say the right things on a piece of paper or a computer, but then when they coach in real life, may treat players completely different. But personally, and I know it's different for every state, I think the best lessons we can learn as coaches are on-the-job lessons, whether it's our first year, 23rd year, or anywhere in between. Because that's when real life really hits, and that's when you realize, like, there are no typical practice, or very few typical practices or games, because there's so many variables that can change situations. And I've had coaches before that say, when I have a player that's late, and they'll rattle off a bunch of different consequences that they always give to every player.
Yeah.
And I think, man, there's so much danger in that, because Jack might be late because he's lazy, but Jack might be late because mom and dad are getting divorced, and there's more anxiety and stress and depression or whatever. And so I think there's got to be, we can't have, and this, I love talking to other coaches that are also teachers. Every student in your class learns differently, and every player in our field or on the court learn differently, and I think need to be treated differently. You can have certain standards that you set in place, but there's got to be wiggle room, I think, and I'm not talking about so your stud player can see the field, the court.
Like you're saying, it's just a level of empathy for kids and their situations.
Yes. Yep.
But before you make a decision to actually understand what's happening.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's awesome. So last question. In your opinion, what are 3 to 5 things max that you think all coaches need to learn this, be educated about this? It could be a topic or a skill. Like, what are 3 to 5 things you're like, man, if all coaches knew how to do this, the youth sports culture would be a lot different?
Communication, I think, would be up there as one of the top 3. Effectively communicating with players, with parents, with administrators. I think so many problems could be solved or even avoided if the communication was in place first. So communication would be up there. I think, practicing what we preach, I don't even know if it's a skill, but it's one of those intangibles where I always say that people have the interview answers. Once again, everyone talks about fundamentals and character and raising better young men or young women. But if we could practice what we preach, and when the proverbial crap hits the fan, and still model and be that living example of selfless leadership, I think that's a huge skill. I'm not sure if that can be learned in a course or just by being, around other coaches that do it right. And I think the third thing, I'll stop at 3, is being yourself. I think that really is a skill. I think sometimes we see successful coaches and we think, well, I've got to be like him. And we start acting or saying things in a way that it's just not authentically who we are. And I think, A, the kids see right through it. And B, we're doing a disservice to everyone else, because there's no cookie cutter great coach. You look at coaches at all different levels, and they can all have different styles, different ways they interact with their players and their coaches and families, and they can all have success. But I think you need to be true to yourself as a coach, so you can help your players to be true to themselves.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks again to Coach Hines for allowing me to interview him. I hope you found this conversation valuable, and be on the lookout for more bonus episodes in the near future. If you want the free podcast notes from this episode or any other episode of the podcast, go to coachesclubpod.com to download a free copy of notes. Thanks for listening to the Coaches Club podcast powered by Transform Sport, where we believe great coaches transform lives, athletes deserve great coaches, and coaches deserve great training.